All right, welcome back. As promised, I'm joined now by one of my favorite people in the world, Russell Baxter. It's been too long since Russell and I have done a podcast together, so I'm so happy that I was able to convince him to come back on. He's such a great resource. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of the NFL and the football stats. So I'm happy to have him on here so that we can talk about those great divisional games this past weekend and some really great matchups in the conference championship games coming up. So, Russell, thanks again for joining me.
Well, you're right. It has been far too long. It's great to hear from you again. And, quite the weekend. We saw 4 divisional games, all decided by 7 points or less. That's the first time that's happened in that round in 12 years, 2003.
The division, the wild card round featured wins by all of the visiting teams. The divisional rounds featured wins by the home teams. It was really a bit of a fluke, wasn't it, that the home field advantage didn't mean that much in the wild card round?
Well, it was the first time. It was not only the first time it had ever happened, Sharona, in the wild card round. It was the first time it had ever happened in the NFL postseason with 4 games like that. It's never happened in the divisional round where all the road teams have won. In fact, under the current playoff format, which goes back to 1990, the only time there was even a losing record by the home teams in one postseason individual was 2008. And I think it was only the Steelers, who wound up winning the Super Bowl that year, were the only home team to play in the divisional round. Remember, that year was Arizona and Philadelphia in the NFC Championship game. Philly was a 6 seed, Arizona was a 4 seed, and Baltimore was a 6 seed, went to Pittsburgh for the AFC title game. So, very rare. Although, when you take into account that all 4 road teams won last week, that means all 4 teams had to hit the road again.
Right.
And 2 weeks in a row against a well-rested team sometimes doesn't add up well.
Yeah. And I think it really, let me ask it to you this way. Which team do you think benefited the most from having that extra week to rest up and recuperate?
I think it was the Denver Broncos because we were getting ready to see what Peyton Manning was capable of. And you watched him yesterday. Ball fluttered a little. Wind was obviously a factor. But Peyton Manning did something yesterday that he hadn't done earlier in the season, and that's not turn over the football. Yeah. That had been a problem. Remember the 17 interceptions? Remember the last time he started a game was at home against Kansas City, and threw 4 picks in that game. He came in relief 2 weeks ago against the San Diego Chargers. And listen, this Bronco team is different than Peyton Manning teams, okay? Even when they won this Super Bowl in 2006, they were, pretty wide open, balanced offense. And then they got to the postseason and they stressed the run. This is a Denver team that's tried to stress the run all year. And obviously they have the top ranked defense in the league. I mean, think about that. 2 years ago, Peyton Manning was at the helm of a team that scored the most points in one season in NFL history, 606. This year, he's at the helm of a team, and he hasn't even been at the helm all year, that gave up the fewest yards and the fewest passing yards in the league. The Denver Broncos this year only scored 355 points. That's 110 less than the New England Patriots this year.
It's crazy. Well, let's talk about that game last in our roundup of last weekend's action. We'll start with the Chiefs and the Patriots. I had a chance to talk to a Philly guy who hosts a radio show there for this same podcast, and we were talking about this game. I love Andy Reid, but this really was kind of a quintessential Andy Reid playoff game.
Well, it was actually a quintessential Andy Reid postseason game against Bill Belichick, because the last time we were so upset about Andy Reid and his team's clock management was Super Bowl 39 when he was with the Eagles and they played the Patriots. It was almost like deja vu. Yeah. They wasted an awful lot of time.
They did.
And especially toward the end there. And listen, you can say all you want about their offense. Their offense was probably about as standard as it was this year. But one thing the Kansas City Chiefs were great at this season and much improved around the NFL, Sharona, was the ability to get to the quarterback, which they were good last year, and they were just slightly better this year, but the takeaways, a big part of the Kansas City Chiefs. Last year, they had 14 takeaways. This year, they had 29, and then 5 more against the Texans. No takeaways against the Patriots. In the regular season, 47 sacks, I think 4th in the league. 3 against Brian Hoyer in the wild card game. No sacks against the Patriots. The way you're not going to beat New England anywhere, not sacking, not pressuring Tom Brady. And yet it was interesting because at the very end, New England, maybe in a holiday mood, decided to throw the ball. Ball deflected, wound up in the hands of Julian Edelman, as it turned out. But could you imagine if that ball went the other way? We'd be talking about that for 30, 40 minutes on your podcast.
Yeah, the bounces definitely seem to go the Patriots' way, as they often seem to do. It can be maddening, if you're rooting for the opposing team, I suppose. You mentioned the lack of urgency. I felt like that was one of the biggest reasons why the Chiefs lost that game. They just did not seem to have a sense of urgency.
Yeah, and it was funny because they ran the ball on New England. Alex Smith made one of the more spectacular pass plays. They were having trouble with covering Jeremy Maclin. He obviously got hurt and so on. That was almost a typical Alex Smith game as well. They ran a lot more plays than the Patriots did. But for some reason, they decided not to run so many when it counted most. And inevitably, it cost them.
Yeah, it really did. The Patriots seemed to kind of recover from their end of the season doldrums. They were definitely, clicking on all cylinders. They got into a really good rhythm. It'll be interesting to see how they're able to carry that. They have to go to Denver, as I recall, right? And
for the second time this year. And remember, they were 10-0 when they went to Denver earlier this year and lost their first loss of the season.
Yeah, that's going to be a great game. We'll talk about that when we get to the conference championship games. Packers-Cardinals, to me, this was the best game. They were all good games, don't get me wrong. This was the best game of the weekend. It was so exciting. I love both of these teams. Give us your thoughts on that, and what you feel like the Cardinals did to ultimately win that game, besides winning the coin toss.
Well, they overcame some of their own issues. Carson Palmer was sacked 3 times, 2 picks, threw a terrible pick in the end zone, and yet hung in there, gave up the lead on the last play of the game, sent it to overtime, and yet still got some breaks. They got the deflected touchdown pass to Michael Floyd in the end zone. And then Carson Palmer, with a little bit of improv, found Larry Fitzgerald in overtime, then a shovel pass, and they escaped. And a lot of people talking about Carson Palmer having a rough game. Well, this was the first time. It was the first playoff game for Carson Palmer in 6 years.
Yeah.
It also was the first time Carson Palmer ever played the playoff game off a bye week. So he might have been a little rusty as well. Give Green Bay credit. They hung in there. They had their own rough year and a rough stretch and so on. But Arizona was the better team all year. And you got to also give them credit on defense. They played pretty well without Tyrann Mathieu, without Corey Redding, without Alex Okafor. Bruce Arians has pushed all the right buttons, and here they are with a chance to go to the Super Bowl for the first time since 2008.
A lot of criticism for Uncle Bruce, as I like to call him. One of my favorite coaches in the NFL, for not running it, instead choosing to pass it on second down toward the end of the fourth quarter. But this is who Bruce Arians is. And, if you've got an offensive philosophy, you should stick to it, I suppose.
Well, they were aggressive all year. They obviously felt they could get, make a big play there. So, yeah, I understand it. And it's easy to tell somebody to pull back the reins like that.
Yeah.
Very easy. But, what was the bigger issue? Their play calling or the fact they let Aaron Rodgers complete a pass for 60 yards on 4th and 20 and then a Hail Mary? That, to me, was the bigger issue.
That was such a crazy play. And, they came out today and said that the plan had been for Patrick Peterson to knock that down. Instead, he went for the big play, and that's kind of how that that went down. It was definitely an exciting game, and the Packers had. You're right; they had an interesting season. Seahawks, Panthers. Panthers jumped out on front. It was 31-0.
31-0 in the second quarter, and we've seen this out of Carolina a couple times this year. Most notably against the Giants, they were up 35-7, allowed the Giants to tie the game. Then they found a way to win it. This time they found a way to hold on. They ran the ball against Seattle, which the number one run defense in the league. They ran it against them up in Seattle earlier this year. Their forte is running the football. And they'll do it whenever they feel like doing it. And I think they just felt confident enough. But they've had games, against the Saints, they gave up 38 points. They gave up 35 to the Giants. So, you also got to give Seattle a little credit. I mean, they're the two-time defending NFC champion. They weren't going to go down without a fight. Yeah. And even though they got off to a rough start,
Yeah,
but they're very
fantastic.
The second half of the year, and they're more Russell Wilson-driven than running game-driven. Mm-hmm. And here's what, people... Think about this. In Russell Wilson's last 4 playoff games, he's thrown 8 interceptions.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy stat and uncharacteristic for him because he's usually pretty careful with the football. The Panthers play a lot of zone coverage. They play a lot of cover 3. I'm not a big fan of the prevent defense. To me, the only thing it seems to do is prevent you from winning football games. Do you think that they'll deviate from their philosophy in this next game?
Well, I just think they're listen, they were banged up at the corners yesterday. I mean, Josh Norman obviously played, but they don't have Peanut Tillman, and they're a little beat up at that cornerback position. And Seattle's wide receivers never get any credit. And Seattle's wide receiver core changed dramatically this year with the addition of Tyler Lockett, who that kind of speed. And remember, he kind of kickstarted the second half with the kickoff return as well. So, I mean, they're better offensively. They're not as good defensively. Yeah, I mean, they held Carolina under 300 yards yesterday. Mm-hmm. But, they're always, for some reason, a different beast on the road. And, Carolina's front dominated their offensive. I mean, lost in the whole thing was Russell Wilson got sacked 5 times.
Yeah, that's pretty. Well, Seattle's offensive line, they're definitely going to have to address that in the offseason. That's a huge concern for them. You mentioned Marshawn Lynch, very much an injury-plagued season for him. It looks like he is done. Possibly done in Seattle. What do you think is next for Marshawn Lynch?
Well, I mean, first things first, and see if they do part ways with him and so on. But I think it'll just depend on the coach and the system. And when you think of former Seahawks right now, you probably think of Atlanta with Dan Quinn. You're always trying to go with the connections and so on. Although they've got Tevin Coleman and they got Devontae Freeman, and Freeman was one of those 1,000-yard backs, even though he got hurt this year. So, I'm sure somebody would like to bring him in and as a starter if he's got anything left. I mean, he's got some miles on him as well. So, and he can be, as we know, he can be Marshawn Lynch. So, that all will take, play a part in where he winds up if and when, the Seahawks cut him loose. But he probably still has some good years left in him. Granted, he can stay healthy.
A lot of talk about maybe him going to Dallas. I could certainly see Jerry Jones making that phone call if he does, part ways with Seattle.
Well, it's possible. I mean, listen, Darren McFadden had a pretty decent year for them, and so on. And Dallas is just such a hard team to get a gauge on. Obviously, they're coming off a year where they played 4 different quarterbacks and got 4 wins out of it.
Yeah, crazy situation there. They're going to have to get somebody to develop behind Tony Romo. Is this going to be the year that they do it? I suppose we'll see. But it's time. I had said a few weeks ago on this podcast that RG3 might be a good guy to go there.
Well, it's possible. Listen, depending on, you get Scott Linehan, who's the offensive coordinator there. The thing about Dallas, though, is their offense is built around the offensive line, okay? So depending on what do they want a drop-back passer? I don't know if RG3 necessarily fits the bill there and so on. And listen, I think they're hoping Tony – the problem with RG3 in bringing him as a developmental quarterback is he's already been in this league 4 years. It's almost like you want to spend a higher draft choice if you like somebody and groom them. Much like Tony Romo, who was signed by the Cowboys – as an undrafted free agent in 2003, and then basically sat on the bench for about 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And not just Tony Romo, but you can see that up in Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor.
Absolutely. Listen, if you're going to bring in RG3 to Dallas, you're in essence kind of saying you're replacing Tony Romo. I don't think the Cowboys are headed in that direction.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting offseason for them. Hopefully you'll come back and we can talk about some offseason moves.
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and finish up with Steelers-Broncos. We sort of touched upon it a little bit with Peyton Manning. It really was a credit to the Steelers what they were able to accomplish with Big Ben banged up, the loss of Antonio Brown, and, of course, they were already without Le'Veon Bell, and they didn't have D'Angelo Williams.
Yeah, and, it was funny. Somebody asked me, what did you learn about the Pittsburgh Steelers yesterday? And Sharona, the first thing came out of my mouth was, wow, they have another good wide receiver in Sammy Coates, who was their third-round pick from Auburn. He stepped in. You saw him a little during the preseason. You saw him yesterday. Big play the first time he touched the ball. Martavis Bryant was terrific. They had the big mistake yesterday. Toussaint fumbled the ball just when it looked like they had the momentum. They played very well despite all their shortcomings. And by the way, some of their shortcomings, as you know, were not injury-related as well. Martavis Bryant was suspended the first 4 games. Le'Veon Bell was suspended the first 2 games. So some self-inflicted wounds as well. But I think they're a team that looks like they're headed in the right direction. And I think, they'll probably address cornerback somewhere. That seems to be their weak spot. Their front seven looks very young and very fast. And I think that was a big problem for the Broncos yesterday. And then I think eventually fast got a little worn down thanks to Denver's running game and offensive line.
Yeah, I think that they're probably going to need to address that secondary sooner rather than later. You mentioned Sammy Coates. He was a guy that I had taken some late-round flyers in some particularly deep fantasy football leagues. He's definitely was an intriguing young guy, another guy who had some off-the-field concerns. And, of course, I haven't heard anything, negative about him in the NFL. And they've also got another guy, Marcus Wheaton. He's pretty darn good, too.
Oh, absolutely. And listen, it's funny. Remember, Darius Hayward-Bay was a guy who was, the 7th pick in the draft a few years ago, kind of washed out in Oakland, got a chance in Indianapolis, didn't do much. He's been a nice addition for the Steelers as well. But the Pittsburgh Steelers used to be the king of the linebackers. Right now they're the king of the wide receivers.
They really
are. Credit Denver what they did. After that, what people missed, I think, or some people missed, was the fact that after they got the Toussaint fumble, Denver had the ball for the next 6 minutes and 52 seconds. They had a 65-yard drive on 13 plays. They really took the steam out of the Steelers in doing that. Pittsburgh, who basically led the entire game after, once they got the lead down 6-0, and looked like they were in control of that game. I think they sapped the life out of them with that drive. That defense looked pretty worn down.
Yeah, you mentioned Denver's defense. I've been raving about him. I'm going to rave about him some more because I love the guy, and we talked about Dallas earlier. DeMarcus Ware, what a great season he had. Now, he missed some games because, he got but still, just a fantastic year for him. And Ole Miss football had a pretty good season. We didn't really talk much about the Larry Fitzgerald spectacular ending to the Green Bay game, but I like to see guys like that. The good guys do well.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, Larry Fitzgerald has played in a little more than a handful of postseason games. He's always come up big. But, on a personal note, I thought his best postseason moment on Saturday night was wishing my good friend Chris Mortensen well.
Yes.
As you may or may not know, I've known Mort for a long time, worked with him for a long time, and you felt it all over the league this week.
Yeah.
Every game you watched, every pregame game show you watched, everybody talking about Mort as he battles stage 4 throat cancer. And as someone asked me today, I said, don't worry. You'll be hearing from him. Don't worry.
Yeah, everyone certainly does wish Chris Mortensen the best, and that was a great moment. You're right, and it's certainly nothing surprising that Larry Fitzgerald would be thinking, of others instead of himself. I was literally on my feet, screaming at the TV, wanting him to score on that fantastic, play.
Yeah. Well, it was and also a great play by Carson Palmer, who, as we said earlier, Sharona. He did not have a great game. I think there was maybe a little nervousness, maybe a little rust.
He was nervous,
et cetera. Again, it's funny. Carson Palmer's been in the league since 2003. Didn't play his rookie year, so it's now 2015, and was only his third playoff game.
It's amazing.
So, right, and actually. You could almost say it was really his second playoff game. If you remember what happened in his first playoff game, which was 10 years ago, blew out his knee, hit by Kimo von Oelhoff, and threw a 66-yard pass, I think it was, to Chris Henry. So it's been quite the road for Carson Palmer, and we're going to talk about some awards, I think, a little later, and his name is certainly going to come up.
Yeah, I was so happy for him, and you're right. Although, if he hadn't gotten injured last year, they definitely would have been in the playoffs and, possibly even in the Super Bowl. So I'm super happy for him. Let's go ahead and talk about the conference championship matchups, and then we will get to year-end awards. Patriots-Broncos, give us your breakdown of that game.
Well, listen, I know Dante Hightower got banged up in the game, but I saw what Denver was able to do to New England in terms of running the football. That was also a game with Brock Osweiler, in which New England was up by 14, wound up losing the game in overtime, 30-24. They gave up the big run in overtime. Listen, Denver, this is a different Denver team, as we said earlier. This was a team that set a record for points scored in a season 2 years ago, okay? And now they're the number one defense, and the quarterback has been an issue for them because of his injuries and his age and all that, but the one thing that Peyton Manning has done a good job of since he got back into the fold, which was, late in the San Diego game, and then this week, he's been careful with the football, okay? And that's the key here, okay? I mean, you saw that Pittsburgh-Denver game yesterday. One turnover by both teams, and the one turnover turned out to be extremely costly.
Yeah.
So to me, this falls on Denver's offensive line, which was a bigger question mark going into the season, Sharona, than the quarterback was. Okay, so it seems like they're better there. Gary Kubiak knows how to run. This is a difficult place to play. I know New England's the defending Super Bowl champion. If I'm New England, I cover Rob Gronkowski with 11 guys. Okay, maybe even throw a couple other people as well. And by the way, don't be surprised if you see Aqib Talib on Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah.
I like Denver in this game. I'm guessing that one or the other game, and by the way, we got the 1 and 2 seeds in both conferences for the first time since 2004. I get the sense one or the other of this game is going into overtime. I haven't made up my mind which one, but I'll take the Broncos at home.
Okay, I like it. Cardinals-Panthers.
Well, again, the 1-2 seeds. Again, I flash back to last year. As you will remember, these teams played in the wild card game. Carolina got the win, went on to play Seattle. Of course, there was no Carson Palmer. It was Ryan Lindley. And when it was all said and done, the Arizona Cardinals totaled 78 yards of offense. That is the fewest yards by any team in NFL history in a postseason game.
It's amazing. It's amazing that Houston didn't get that record with their playoff appearance this year.
Yeah, no, they tried. They were able to at least run the ball. I mean, the Cardinals were so inept. And again, they were down running backs. They were. It was Scotch tape and glue for Bruce Arians at the end of the year last year. There's no question about that. But here's my prediction for this game. There will be at least one play by the Cardinals that covers 78 yards on offense. Just because of irony. But it won't be enough because I just think Carolina finds way to win. They're the one team in this league that not only has offensive playmakers, they have defensive playmakers. Luke Kuechly, Thomas. Think about Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis yesterday. One guy returns a pick six. The other guy is on the hands team, Thomas Davis, for the onside kick by Seattle. So you have to like what you see. It again. Carolina's won 12 straight games at home, including the playoffs. It's funny. You've got the NFC, where the two teams, Arizona and Carolina, have combined to go to the Super Bowl twice. And then you have the Broncos and the Patriots, who combined to go to the Super Bowl 15 times. So, but I think we're going to see the number ones again. I think that will be the third straight year, and that'll be Denver and Carolina.
Yeah, it does. The Panthers certainly do seem to find a way to win at home, and you're picking both home teams, so that home field advantage. We'll see if that still sticks. Let's go ahead and talk about year-end awards. I didn't put MVP on our notes. Is Cam Newton your MVP?
Yeah, and I think the reason for me is, and to me, it's for most of the year it was a three-man race. Okay, Cam Newton, Tom Brady, and Carson Palmer.
Yeah.
But by the end of the year, Cam. The thing that impressed me most about Cam is he got better as the year went on. He had come into the season never throwing 5 touchdown passes in a game. He did it three times in the span of 5 weeks. 35 touchdown passes, 10 rushing touchdowns. Clearly the leader of the game. He should get MVP just for handing out footballs to the kids.
Oh, no doubt.
But let's keep it on the field. Yeah. I think he was the most valuable player. He epitomizes this confident Carolina team who, it's been, think about this. This was a team at the beginning of last year that was 3-8-1. And since then, they are 20-2, including the playoffs.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. All right, so let's talk about Offensive Player of the Year. Who is your Offensive Player of the Year? And, I don't know. What do you think? Should we limit this to just regular season, or should we include
Well, no, it is regular season. The awards that are given out by the Associated Press are regular season.
All right.
Okay, so, and that's how I don't vote for the Associated Press. I know people who do. Okay. But I look at it as a regular season award, and although we've had quarterbacks who had great years, I'm going to go a little off the board as far as the Offensive Player of the Year, and I'm going to take Antonio Brown, the wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know Julio Jones had as many catches. I know Julio Jones had slightly more yards. But you look, he was literally uncoverable at times. He had a game where he caught 16 passes and another game where he caught 17 passes. Remember, last year he became the first Steelers player in history to lead the league in receptions and receiving yards. This year he tied for the league lead in receptions. And you're talking about a guy who had 129 catches last year, Sharona, which was the second highest total of all time. And he wound up with 136 this year, and basically about 200 more yards. Again, I don't like to do the speculation game. He did this basically with 3 different quarterbacks this year.
Yeah,
but
crazy.
Watching what he did, maybe the Denver was really something. And remember, yesterday they didn't have him, but when they played the Broncos in Week 15, 16 for $189 and 2 touchdowns. He burned Chris Harris, a Pro Bowl corner, who had not given up a touchdown pass in a couple of years. So a lot of great candidates, but I'm going to go Antonio Brown as the Offensive Player of the Year.
No, I completely agree, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Chris Harris is fantastic, and he did. He had a fantastic game on him. Defensive Player of the Year, is it J.J. Watt?
Yeah, it is. It's funny. Last year he had 20.5 sacks, but Justin Houston had 22. But remember, last year he had all those other defensive plays and some offensive plays. This year they asked him to do different things. Houston wound up third in the league in offense. He wound up leading the league with 17.5 sacks. Yeah, I mean, and listen, it was not a great year for defense in this league. Listen, and trust me, when the ballot comes out and we see all the voting, don't be surprised if there's like 2 or 3 Carolina Panthers on there, like Josh Norman, like Thomas Davis, like Kawan Short. But I'll lean Watt slightly in not what I would call a great year for defense around the league. But then again, that's how the rules are right now too.
You know, it's going to be interesting, but I think he's going to probably win it. If nothing else, just for pure name recognition, and you know, he's definitely one of the best defensive players of this generation. I don't think there's any question about that. Offensive Rookie of the Year.
We saw some flashes from Amari Cooper. We saw some flashes from Todd Gurley. But after a slow start, he had quite the finish, and that was Jameis Winston, the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We saw some moments, obviously, from Marcus Mariota as well. Gurley was one of the few 1,000-yard rushers in the league. And remember, he got off. We didn't see him early in the season. Amari Cooper was the only rookie to get 1,000 yards receiving this season. But Jameis Winston wound up throwing for over 4,000 yards. The Bucs offense was 5th in the league in terms of yards gained. And Winston, who got off to a very sluggish start. Remember the Week 1 game where they lost 42-14 at home to Tennessee? There were all, and you do this knee-jerk reaction society we have now. Oh, they took the wrong guy. Mariota should have gone one. When it was all said and done, Marcus Mariota had a very respectable year, but Jameis Winston had a very promising year, and I'll take Winston.
See, I would pick Marcus Mariota because I think that when you consider what Mariota had to work with versus what Jameis Winston had to work with, and statistically, Marcus Mariota's numbers are better than Jameis Winston's. And I just think it's important. Of course, he did miss, I don't know, what, two games maybe? I think that does hurt him. There's no doubt about it. It probably,
if I had to guess, he'll get some votes. I think Gurley will get some votes. I won't be surprised if Amari Cooper is the one challenger to Winston in terms of Rookie of the Year. Winston he started all 16 games. That's a big plus. Amari Cooper faded a little, but he played all year as well. But, not playing all 16 games, it's not an official tiebreaker, but it certainly doesn't help your cause.
Yeah, I don't think it helps your cause, and it certainly doesn't help his cause that the Titans only won 3 games. So, that also hurts him too. What about Defensive Rookie of the Year?
Well, I'm going to go, again, very obvious to me, is Marcus Peters, the cornerback for the Kansas City Chiefs, tied for the NFL lead with 8 interceptions, had another one in the wild card game, a ton of passes knocked down. He was a big listen, last year Kansas City had 6 interceptions as a team. He had 8 alone this year. That's almost a big time, enough said. We saw some other promising rookies at time. I'd like Leonard Williams, what I saw with him with the Jets on occasion. But I think from stem to stern, Marcus Peters was pretty impressive.
I wanted to ask you, Defensive Player of the Year, did you consider Aaron Donald?
Absolutely. And he could very, very, very well win it. I mean, I didn't list all the people that I would, put in there and so on.
I was just curious.
It's hard to ignore what he did. Listen, Khalil Mack had a tremendous year for the Oakland Raiders. He changed their fortunes on defense. They didn't have a winning season, but they were a much improved football team. So, listen, Tyrann Mathieu for the Arizona Cardinals. There's somebody else. So, I mean, to me, like I said, it was not a great year for defense in the league. Even Aaron Donald had his moments, but then again, sometimes the Rams were an erratic football team, and sometimes even on defense. So, it's that, I think, of all the awards to come out, Sharona, I think that one's going to be the one that's the closest.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. What about Coach of the Year?
Oh, I think I like Ron Rivera, okay? Yeah. I mean, I think Mike Zimmer is certainly somebody you have to look at, a team that dethroned the Packers 7-9 to 11-5. Ron Rivera, listen, they lost 1 game all year.
I know, that's crazy.
So that's kind of hard to ignore. And remember, when it's all said, listen, I know they won the NFC South last year, okay, with a 7-8-1 record.
Right.
So they more than doubled their wins from a year ago. They went from 7 to 15, okay? Yeah. So I think you have to look at that. And they had their own early issues as far as changes go, offensive line, losing Kelvin Benjamin. There's always a lot of candidates. Coach of the year a lot of times, as you know, winds up coming down. It's almost like it's the most improved team, whether that's fair or unfair. Okay, I mean Andy Reid will probably get some votes. A 1-5 team that then finishes 11-5. I think Mike Zimmer will certainly get some votes. Somebody might even vote for Jay Gruden. I mean, that was a team that won the NFC East after 4 wins last year. So it almost turns into the most improved team. But, by the way, if Rivera wins it, the last 4 NFL head coaches of the year would have been Bruce Arians, Ron Rivera, Bruce Arians, Ron Rivera. And guess who's facing each other in the NFC title game this week?
That's pretty crazy. Well,
Bruce Arians and Ron Rivera.
Those are, and I like Mike Zimmer too. 3 of my favorite coaches in the National Football League. Comeback Player of the Year. Is there any doubt?
Well, sadly, okay. No. Let me finish what I want to say first.
Okay.
Sadly, there's a lot of candidates this year. Okay, and for me, Comeback Player of the Year, I know some, like Phillip Rivers got it a couple of years ago because he didn't have a great year. For me, Comeback Player of the Year is overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm kind of torn because you have somebody who was hurt last year, missed 10 games, came back and had an amazing season. And then again, you have a young man who overcame, cancer. And comes back, makes the Pro Bowl again. So I'm kind of leaning slightly to Carson Palmer of the Arizona Cardinals. With Eric, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, because we've seen co-MVPs. Be shocked if a lot of people split their votes. The AP. And if you were asking me and I was a voter, I think I would probably split my vote between Eric Berry and Carson Palmer because they're 2 different sets of circumstances. There's no wrong answer. I mean, but, think about Derek Johnson from the Kansas City Chiefs got hurt on the first play of the season last year and then came back. Danny Woodhead got hurt when he came back and had a good year. That's what I mean. The sad part about this award is there were 2 damn many candidates this year who bounced back, and that's the sad part, So it's not a cop-out answer. I think it's actually hopefully a good answer. I think I'd split it between Palmer and Berry or Berry and Palmer.
It's a good answer. There's no, as you said, there's no right or wrong answer. It's your opinion. It's your vote.
Yeah, right. And remember, the AP awards are not like the Pro Bowl. It's 50 voters make up a board. It's not a popularity I mean, you could say it's a popularity contest, but it's not like the Pro Bowl where you have 1/3 players, 1/3 coaches, and 1/3 fans. There's no fan vote when it comes to the Associated Press Awards.
Yeah, that's true too. Real quick, I know you got things that you need to do. Coaching moves. Who are your best and worst fits?
Well, I did a piece for Bleacher Report this morning in terms of, and we're still sorting out the coordinators, but as far as the top head coaching move, I go with Dirk Cutter down in Tampa Bay. I didn't like how it was handled by the Buccaneers letting Lovie Smith go after they went from 2-14 to 6-10. They did lose their last 4 games. I understand that. But to me, the reason Dirk Cutter is the head coach of the Buccaneers is because if he wasn't promoted, he was going to be a head coach somewhere else. He had a short stint with Matt Ryan in Atlanta and did good things for him. He was in Jacksonville a couple of years before that. So for me, the Buccaneers, who are going to ride Jameis Winston around here, I mean, at least for a couple of years until they can fix their defense. And by the way, they're looking for a new defensive coordinator. Leslie Frazier was let go. So to me, I like that a lot. And then you get into the coordinators, and everybody's interviewing. It's hard to not like a move right now because there's so much else to sort out. The one thing I will say though is Chip Kelly's in San Francisco, and that's not a bad move, strictly based on the fact, Sharona, that they have a general manager.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For what it's worth, and depending on how you look at that situation. I don't like Dick Cutter. I'm not a big fan of him. We'll see how that works out. I think if Jim Schwartz is hired in Philadelphia, as it does look like that seems to be taking place or possibly taking place tomorrow, I'm going to really like that move a lot.
I would too. Once again, you're asking me as of right now.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And as you see, I mean, listen, there were stories bouncing around today of Ray Horton was staying in Tennessee,
right.
Or was he interviewing with Cleveland? Exactly. So it's like up to the moment. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think people forget Jim Schwartz had his ups and downs in Detroit as a head coach, but then he went to Buffalo as a defensive coordinator, and they were tremendous.
Yeah.
Okay, and that means the Eagles would probably go back to a 4-3.
Right.
They've already got some.
Should.
Yes, they've already got some promising defensive linemen there as well. Anyway, with Fletcher Cox and so on. So that would be an excellent hire. I agree if that's the case. But as of right now, I'm going to lean a little Dirk Cutter, even though great minds don't agree all the time. So
how are you liking Brian Schottenheimer to Indianapolis?
Well, I mean, Clyde Christensen's going to be the offensive coordinator there. So, if Brian Schottenheimer, correct me if I'm wrong, they're thinking about him as what, quarterbacks coach?
I'm not exactly sure what role he's going to do.
Yeah, no, but I mean, Clyde Christensen is the rumored hire to be the new offensive coordinator with the Colts. Okay, so I don't know what Brian Schottenheimer would necessarily do. But I'll tell you this, if he can teach Andrew Luck not to turn over the football, he'd be worth a hire.
Well, yeah. And Brad Childress to Kansas City, do you like that move?
Well, I mean, that just kind of, that's a promotion. That's Andy, keeping things in-house and so on. Losing Doug Peterson, which is a great opportunity for Doug Peterson with the Philadelphia Eagles. They seem to be very, very excited about that. So, listen, people forget, although he changed teams, Andy Reid is the longest tenured head coach in the league. He's not the longest tenured head coach with the same team. That's Bill Belichick. But Andy Reid's been the head coach in this league since 1999. So, and obviously he's now had playoff success with two franchises, the Eagles and the Chiefs. There's only about a handful of guys that have done it with three teams, and only one guy, Bill Parcells, has done it with four teams. Andy just needs to work on that clock management, I guess, a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Russell, it's always such a pleasure, and it has been too long. We're going to have to work on that this year. Tell everybody out there where they can find you on social media and find your work. Well,
first things first, Facebook, there's a Pro Football Guru page. Probably more fun for me is Twitter, which is Bax Football Guru. We have quite the following on there. As far as my work, Bleacher Report, NFL Spin Zone, which is growing by leaps and bounds every day, part of Fansided and purchased by the Time Inc. people, about a year ago. The site is really upgraded. Bleacher Report, I think, speaks for itself these days. The fact that I'm able to write for both of them I'm thrilled with the opportunity they've given me the last 3 or 4 years. And then, other things I do around, a few radio shows here and there, and an occasional podcast with my friend Sharona.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.